surprise guest. Inga Weber, many of you know Inga. She's been involved in the pro-life movement in Spokane for many, many, many years. Wait, I'm making her sound old. She's not. In fact, she was the director of, was it the second 40 Days for Life campaign? Second and third, I think, in Spokane. And has just been a wonderful pro-life activist. And she's going to say a few words. So welcome, Inga Weber.
Thank you, and welcome to all of you to this rally today. As John said, my name is Inga Weber, and I have been involved with all the 40 Days for Life campaigns that have been held here in Spokane. The first one, I believe, was in 2008, if I'm correct. I lose track of time because I am getting old, sorry. But what I wanted to really speak to everybody today about is one of the key components of the 40 Days for Life vigils that are held across the country, and that is the peaceful vigil that is held here where you are standing today during the 40 Days for Life. And I have to admit that the first time I came down, I had an agenda, and my agenda was to stop my niece from having an abortion. And she was scheduled to have an abortion on a Thursday, and I came down on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I couldn't come on Thursday. And I have to say also that the only reason why I was able to come down is I knew a woman who was down here every day and had been coming down for 2 or 3 years prior to that time I came down. And I knew what time she came down. So I knew there was somebody there, here, that I could stand and pray with. And I did come down, and she was here, and we prayed together. And long story short on that one, my niece did change her mind. And so it was, you know, the power of prayer. She didn't even come down to this facility. She changed her mind before coming down. So I just, that's one of the first things, you know, that I realized, you know, power of prayer is really something that we have to hang on to and believe in and never lose hope in, even when it seems like nothing is going to happen. I've come down since that time for every 40 Days for Life, and also for about 2 years, maybe 3 years, I was coming down pretty much every weekday, even outside of 40 Days for Life, for an hour to pray for the unborn. And I have to tell you that it can be very discouraging because you come down and you see nothing happening. You see the people still coming and going in swarms inside and back out with broken hearts. You can see the broken hearts of the women as they come out after having an abortion. So it can be discouraging. But what I did learn is that if I come down, not so much for my agenda, but in obedience to God, that He's calling me to be here and to pray. And that is the most important thing, is to be obedient to God's call. And so I encourage you to keep that in mind when you do come down, especially on days that you are discouraged, when you come down here and pray, and you may be the only one down here praying. If people drive by and ignore you, or people drive by and throw water balloons at you, or whatever else they throw, or they hurl insults at you, know that you are there as a witness to the light and to the truth. You are here for that. And that minds and hearts are being changed even if you don't see them. I have to tell you a couple of experiences that I did have that are very encouraging, and I guarantee you that if you are faithful in coming down on a regular basis, that the Lord will bless you with these consolations also. There was one time I was here praying, and I saw a woman come out of the abortion clinic, and she was standing over here. There's a sort of a sitting area down by the walk-in gate down here, and she was in that area, and I just felt the Lord tugging on my heart to go and talk to her. And I didn't want to because I'm rather shy, and I said okay, because the Lord kept pressuring me and, you know, putting that little nudge in my heart. So I went over and I talked to her and I said, "Hi, are you okay?" And she was crying, and she said, yeah, I'm all right. And I says, "Well, is there anything I can do to help?" So we started a conversation, and it turns out she had gone in for a pregnancy test, and she was indeed pregnant. And like Jenny, we just heard in this song, she was thousands of miles from home. Her family was in Pennsylvania, I believe, and she was out here going to school, and she was pregnant, she did discover. She was about 8 weeks pregnant at the time of her pregnancy test when I was talking to her. And so I told her, I says, you know, there are some opportunities and options for you and for your baby. So I tried to connect her right away to her baby, not to just the fact that she's pregnant, because women sometimes just don't make that connection that pregnancy means baby. So you need to make that connection for them. And encouraged her to go to Life Services, and also gave her some information on some other resources that are available to her. She still didn't seem totally convinced. She was scared. And I said, you know, in here in this clinic, they say that they offer you, you know, options and all your different choices that you have. I says, but really they only offer you abortion because that's where they make their money. They don't really tell you a whole lot about the other options and opportunities that you and your baby have. And she said, yeah, they already told me I should have an abortion. That's the best thing for me and for the fact that I'm pregnant. And so I pulled out a brochure I had that had the development of a baby. And I says, here, maybe this will help you. And it has some pictures. And she was so excited. She grabbed a hold of that and said, this is what I'm looking for. So I encourage you, if you can, to get brochures from Life Services or other resources that you can carry with you down here. So should the opportunity arise, you can give it to them. Another experience I had that was very profound, and I thank Father O'Brien for being here with us today, is that when our spiritual leaders, our pastors, our ministers, our deacons, whoever is the leaders of our churches are down here, it makes a profound difference. Number one, the people of his flock will come down here when they know he is here. And I've seen that in the past campaigns. Number two, because we are here and it is a spiritual battle, when a pastor is here, the powers of hell recognize the power that is in that pastor that is unique among them as pastors of the people. And the experience I had was I was down here praying, and my pastor came down when he heard I was here, and we started praying together. Shortly after he showed up, a car drove into the parking lot with a man and a woman in it, and the woman got out of the car and went right inside those doors over there. The man got out and sauntered over to us, and he said, he shared with us the dilemma that they were in because a friend of theirs insisted on coming for an abortion, and they were here. They'd already dropped her off and were coming to pick her up, and he was torn. He would not have come over and talked to me, but he came over because there was a priest, and he was directing all of his comments to the priest as if looking for some kind of help. After that, a couple more girls came out. It was an abortion day. A couple more girls came out, and I talked to my pastor, and I said, well, there's another one that just had an abortion. Look at, you can tell just from the way she's walking. And so he was just torn. He was very, very torn seeing that. And then another girl came out with a guy, and she was crying, and she was staying up by the doors. After a little bit, she came over to the sitting area over there also. Then, while we were still praying, we were praying together and mindful of this woman and praying for her, the girl came outside the fence, the barrier here, and went around the corner, and the pastor said, she's getting sick. So we walked over to her and ministered to her and loved her and hugged her and just shared love and forgiveness and healing with her as best as we could in the situation. That's the most activity I had seen in that 1 hour time when I've been down here, was when there was a priest down here, when there was a pastor down here. So if you can get your pastors to come down, it is very, very powerful, and I think more will be done in the spiritual realm and in closing these doors when we have our leadership down here leading us as the flocks. So again, I want to encourage you to come down as often as you can and to make sure that you pray and submit what you're coming down for to the Lord, and He will do mighty works, whether you see them or not. He will do mighty works in your heart and in all the hearts of those who see you, who witness your being here, whether they hate you at the moment or they're appreciative of you being here. Something's going to happen and change in their lives. So again, I thank you, and go to the website and sign up for those vigil hours. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Inga. So I'm going to talk at you for a few minutes before we have our next speaker. I'm going to give you just a few of the guidelines for those of you who are not familiar with 40 Days for Life. First of all, we have cards for any of you who don't know the address of the website or who want the email address. We can give you a card so that you can get there. It also has a phone number for those of you who don't have internet access. You can get to it. For those of you who have good memories, it's 40daysforlife.com/Spokane. That's 40daysforlife.com/Spokane, and you can sign up for vigil hours there. And the main thing you can do during this vigil that starts Wednesday is to be out here as many hours as you can. Prayer and fasting are the key components, along with the constant vigil, which runs from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. during this campaign. If you have any questions, just contact us via the website, email, or phone, and we'll be happy to help you with any of that. The other things you should know in terms of rules and regulations are you're not allowed to plant any signs in the grass. In other words, if you have signs that are on wire stakes, you can't plant them in the grass, but you can hold signs. If you had a sign that was attached to, say, a wooden pole, you can rest it on the grass and then balance it in your hand. And again, if you have any questions about rules, regulations, or anything, don't hesitate to let us know. And finally, be aware of the no parking signs, and don't park in that lot right directly across the street. You can park in the Salvation Army lot that's over on the corner there, or on the side streets, as long as you pay attention to the signs. So with the rules out of the way, I want to follow on just a little bit onto what Inga said. And first I want to tell you how much I love this motto. Some of you may recognize it. Every child a wanted child. Isn't that a nice motto? Anybody have any problem with that motto? That's Planned Parenthood's motto. And I can't argue with that. I pray that every child who comes into this world will be wanted and loved. But what they mean is that if there is a pregnancy that is unintended and the woman doesn't want the child, that child should be killed. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that women and Planned Parenthood folks will say about why it's okay to have abortions, why maybe it's even a good thing to have abortions. For example, and I heard a Gonzaga law professor say this just a couple of weeks ago, it's my body, it's my choice. What I do in the privacy of my own home or in the privacy of an abortion clinic should be up to me. So, let's just look at that for a minute. And by the way, I want to just give attribution before I get too far afield and forget to give attribution. All of these ideas came from Scott Klusendorf, author of a book called The Case for Life. So, okay, let's just examine that for a minute. Let's say the woman had a 2-year-old toddler and decided that toddler is inconvenient and unwanted. Would it be okay for that woman, in the privacy of her home, to kill that toddler? And of course the answer is no. And we have to ask ourselves, why is the answer no? And what it comes down to is, as Scott Klusendorf says, there is only one question when it comes to abortion, and that is, what is the unborn? If the unborn is not a human person, then no justification for abortion is required. It should be no more morally significant to have an abortion than to have a tooth extracted or to get a haircut. But if the unborn is a human person, then no justification is satisfactory. But women will say, gosh, I can't afford to raise any more children. I already have several children, we don't have enough income, and we just can't afford this other child. Fair enough. Let's go back to the question. What is the unborn? And let's use the example of a 2-year-old. Let's say she has a 2-year-old and decides, we just can't afford to feed this 2-year-old anymore. Is it okay if she kills the 2-year-old? No. And people might object and say, well, gosh, that's completely different. The 2-year-old is a person who's already here, and the unborn child isn't. That's the question. What is that unborn child? If that unborn child is just as much a human person as the 2-year-old, then she can't kill it. There are plenty of other examples. Rape and incest. A child with disabilities. Always ask the same question. What is the unborn? That's the one question. So, we've been talking about a 2-year-old versus an unborn child. And as Scott says in his book, there are really only 4 differences between unborn children and born children and adults. And those are size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. Think of the acronym SLED. So let's go over that for just a minute. Size. Would you all agree that an unborn child is smaller than a 2-year-old toddler? Of course. But wouldn't you say that a 2-year-old toddler is smaller than a teenager? Does that make the teenager more valuable? No, they're both equally human. So size doesn't make any difference. Size does not contribute to a person's worth as a human being. Level of development. A 2-year-old toddler, a little girl, doesn't even have her sex organs fully developed yet. Her reproductive organs aren't developed in the same way that a teenager does. So level of development doesn't make the 2-year-old less of a human being than the teenage girl. Environment. Most of you were somewhere else about a half an hour ago. You were in your homes, you were at the store, you were somewhere else, and then you came over here. Does where you are translate into who you are? Does an 8-inch journey down the birth canal make somebody who wasn't a person before into a person? No. So environment does not change one's worth. And degree of dependency, and this is one that a lot of people will use, arguing for the right to choose abortion. They'll say, gosh, an unborn child is completely dependent on its mother. Well, I would submit that a toddler is also completely dependent on its mother. How long would a toddler get along without its parents? And there are plenty of people who are older who are dependent on medical machinery, kidney dialysis, drugs to keep them alive. So degree of dependency does not equal humanity. Keep these things in mind as you're talking to people about why you're against abortion, because the unborn is fully human. If they are, there is no justification that works. If they aren't, no justification is needed. The next speaker is Janine Moore, who is the volunteer director with Life Services. And she's going to give a testimony, and then we'll move on from there.
I'm taking my shoes off. Good afternoon. I didn't want to fall off the ladder. That would be embarrassing. My name is Janine Moore. I'm actually the Director of Volunteer Development at Life Services in Spokane. And what that means is I just recruit, train, and screen all of the volunteers we have, which is a huge number because we are volunteer-driven. Without our volunteers, we would not exist. We have over 160 volunteers right now, so it's a pretty big deal. What I'm going to talk to you about today is just a little bit about who I am and where I've come from and why I'm doing what I'm doing. I actually was not raised in a real great home environment at all. My mother and father had a tumultuous relationship from the beginning, and my response to that as a very young child was to have what they called failure to thrive, which just means I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, and I cried a lot. So I've changed a little bit from that now. But the thing is that a lot of times that's a child's response to stress and difficulty. And so my parents remained married for about 3 years, and at that point their marriage ended. My mother took my younger sister and my older sister with her, moved to Vegas, and told my dad she's next door if you want her. So she just couldn't cope with the difficulty of a child like me. So my dad quickly remarried. He remarried a woman who was actually very good to me for a couple of years. She was very loving, very kind, but then she started having her own children and things changed very rapidly. Home life was no better after that. My dad is somewhere between a deist and agnostic, and my stepmom was confused. She read tarot cards and joined the Mormon church, and so I didn't have a lot of exposure to Christianity, although I did visit a couple of churches. And when I visited the churches, I oftentimes would ask Christ to come into my life because I heard so many times that if I had Christ in my life, all my problems would be gone and I would have peace and joy and all those kinds of things. So I accepted Christ, and I went home and I didn't have peace and joy and lack of fear and pain. And so then I'd go back to church and I'd accept Christ again. And I accepted Christ, I bet, a dozen times in my childhood. So on my 18th birthday, I moved out of my house to go to college. I couldn't wait to move out of my house. My parents told me, when you leave, take everything because you won't be coming back. And I actually never did go back, and that's actually okay. But I took everything. I went to college. Quickly after that, I met a man in college who had told me that he was a Christian man. He was very active in his church. He led the choir. He taught Sunday school. And we had a relationship. And even though I wasn't raised morally, I knew right and wrong and really tried to do the right thing most of the time. So we abstained from intimacy through our relationship until we got engaged. And he, told me that it was different now. Now it's like we're married. We have a commitment. And I'm just like all of you. I'll do anything to justify sin when I want to sin. And so it sounded like a reasonable explanation, and so we justified our sin. Shortly thereafter, I found myself pregnant. Being pregnant to me was not a horrible thing. I always wanted more than anything to be a mother. It wasn't a good time in my life, but it wasn't a horrible thing to me. So when we went to Planned Parenthood and I heard their solution, which was that the very best thing for me would be to abort the child. Because after all, abortion is safer than childbirth, and that our relationship would never withstand having a child. And so we left the clinic, and I was sitting in a park with my fiance at the time, and listening to him tell me that this was what we needed to do, and the biggest reason he had was that he couldn't face the church, that it would be too painful and too embarrassing to face the church. And so I begged and pleaded and cried and told him I would leave. I was willing to leave and go away somewhere. I thought of Alaska. I don't know why. I lived in Southern California. I think it was the furthest place I could think of. But then he reminded me that how would I afford it? How would I pay for that? How would I take care of myself? So I went for the abortion. I was actually 3.5 months pregnant, so I had a second trimester abortion. And there was not one point in that it was a relief for me. I don't remember a lot about it. I just remember a couple of very specific things. And I want you men in the crowd to hear what I'm saying especially, because more than anything, I wanted him to come in and rescue me. I wanted him to defend what was happening. And the other thing that I remember was that when I woke up on the table, I felt dead. I felt I had no purpose left. I knew immediately what I had done. It was not a good day. So we left, and I cried for several weeks, and at one point he told me, "How long are you going to go on about this?" So I did what many women do. I now know this. I buried it, and I never spoke of it again, ever, with anyone. We continued going to church. We were very active in the church. I smiled all the time. I was very productive. I did everything with full fervor. I was perfect at everything, perfect at my job, perfect keeping the house, perfect with my diet, my weight, my children, everything I could be to prove that I wasn't what I felt inside. Our marriage lasted about 10 years. And we divorced because there was no love, there was no respect, and he was abusive. When I divorced him, I saw people in the grocery store that I had gone to church with for years that ignored me. Because that's what happens when they are able to see your sin. And so I walked away from the church, I walked away from God, I walked away from anyone, and I decided I would do life on my own. So I did that for many years, and I wasn't very good at it. I kind of sucked at it, actually. But at least I didn't feel condemned all the time. So eventually, I met my current husband. He was a Christian man. He was born-again Christian, although he was not walking with the Lord at the time. And I was actually very happy about that because I was quite sick of Christians at that point in my life. So I was okay with where he was. Eventually in our relationship, one of my friends invited me to church, and I went reluctantly just to kind of shut her up, really. I went a few times, and I began feeling God really working on my heart for the first time. Eventually I ended up down on my knees in my front room, asking God to fill me and take over my life. We continued on and got married. We eventually both committed everything we had to Jesus Christ. We sought to live that way. We sought to raise our kids that way. We eventually entered the school of ministry. And it was at that time that we were asked to do a project, and the project was that we were to come up with a ministry that was our own and that God was asking us to do. And we were supposed to present this ministry to the classes for a final exam. And so I quickly came up with mine, because I'm very type A. I got it done right away, and I was pretty proud about it. I didn't consult God that much. I just made sure he was okay with the idea. And eventually, after I had the project done, he started waking me up in the middle of the night and saying, "That's not your project. That's not your ministry." So this continued for several nights, and I finally heard him very clearly say to me that your ministry is to be to women who have had abortions, women who are contemplating abortions, women who are faced with unplanned pregnancies, and he laid out an entire ministry, ways that I was going to help women have real choices. And oh, by the way, you're going to share your abortion. That was the part I wasn't okay with. God and I wrestled for several nights. My husband did not even know. My children did not even know. But I eventually came clean. I eventually shared it with my husband. I asked if I could share this at my small group first before I went to the School of Ministry. The reason I did that was because I was very nervous, and I thought, I'll do it here where I'm comfortable with these people. They were godly people that were in our lives and mentoring us, and we had a group that was very honest and transparent and all that stuff. So I asked if I could share this story, and I did so. When I was done sharing my story, I looked up across the room, and the leaders of the group, who were a very godly couple, the woman had tears running down her face, and she stood up at the table and said, "Mike and I had an abortion before we got married, and we've never shared it." When I went to the School of Ministry and presented my story, I had many women approach me and say the same thing. These were women who were in the School of Ministry. That's a step further than just sitting in the pews. I realized then what God was doing. I realized then that God was trying to show me that our sin, our guilt, our shame, and our silence in the church is killing us. It is rendering us completely ineffective. 1 in 3 women by the age of 45 will have had at least one abortion, according to Guttmacher Institute research. According to the same research, over 65% of women having abortions are professing Christians. Why is that happening in our church? I believe it's happening in our church because we're fake. We fake, and I know I'm being harsh today, but I just need you to hear me on this. We're fake, and we cheapen God's gospel, and we cheapen His grace by thinking that if we just have little sins, we're okay, that God's okay with that. It's those really big sins that He's not okay with. And so what we do, and by the way, that's bunk. God is not okay with little sins. They're all the same. But what we do then with that is that the people who have those really big sins shut up, don't share, pretend, or they don't even show up in our church. So I understood that that is what God is doing. So my challenge to you today, as you stand out here and pray, is if you have an opportunity to talk to a young woman or a young man, I would ask that you would be transparent, that you would be real, that you would be vulnerable, that you would share your life, that you would show them something that God was able to transform in you. Because sometimes our ugliest mess is what gives other people hope. I'm not ashamed of my story anymore because I realize that if God could clean me up and use me, that He can do it with anyone. And we all need to start doing that. The truth is that the stench of our pretending is driving the people that we're trying to save into the very arms of the people we're trying to rescue them from. So we need to start getting this right. We need to start sharing and being honest. The last thing that I want to share with you is something when I prepare to give my testimony, I always ask God, what is it that you want me to say to these people? What is it that this crowd needs to hear? And last night as I wrestled, because He always shows up at the last minute, as I wrestled with this last night, I was remembering when I used to, when I was younger and I would drive by, this was after my abortion, and I would see people out in the front of Planned Parenthood and they were holding their signs, and that was back in the day when they were really graphic and gross, but some of them weren't that way. And I used to think to myself, I hate abortion, it makes me sick, it's an atrocity. But I used to wonder, is that helping? Is that doing anything? And I don't know, I guess maybe sometimes it is, but I want to encourage you, and I also want to share what I feel God wants you to hear. First of all, praying is vital in the kingdom of God. We cannot accomplish anything without praying. So I ask you to pray, to sign up to pray, to come down and pray, to pray when you're not here, to pray when you drive by, to get every one of these slots filled up and pray. But I'm sorry to tell you, but that's not all He's asking of us. That is not all He requires of us. Praying is so vital. I was reading Isaiah 58 last night, and in Isaiah 58, the people are crying out to God, and they're saying, why are you not hearing us? Why are you not answering our fasting and praying? We're fasting and praying all the time, and you're not answering us. The truth is, the fasting and praying had become a ritual. It had become a liturgical requirement that you had to pray this long, and you had to pray this much, and on this day, and this prayer. and it wasn't from their hearts anymore. And I want to read to you what the response of God is to that. Isaiah 58, and this is 3 through 9, and I left out some verses, so why have we fasted and prayed, they say, and you have not seen? Why have we afflicted our souls, and you take no notice? You will not fast and pray as you do this day to make your voice heard on high, God says. This is not the fast that I have chosen. To loose the bonds of wickedness, is this not the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and that you bring into your house the poor who are cast out? When you see the naked, that you cover him, and you not hide yourself from your own flesh, then you shall break forth like the morning. Your healing shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, here I am. I want to say, keep praying. But we need to do more than pray. The needs of these girls that are facing unplanned pregnancies, if just one person had reached out to me and said, let me help you. Let me walk through this with you. We have solutions, so be out here and pray. But partner with Life Services, because we have been here for 20 years. We have things in place. We have ways and things that will, practical things that will help these girls overcome the obstacles that they see. Because the truth is, these girls walking in here are not evil. They're not the enemy. They feel that is their only choice. It is our job to say to them, this is not your only choice. Let me walk through this with you. And the last thing I'm going to say is God desperately wants to heal this land. He desperately wants to heal Spokane. He wants the lies that are written up on the side of this building to be the truth of God's people. But he will only do it when we link arms together as the body of Christ. Not Catholic Church, not Lutheran Church, not Episcopalian Church, not Life Services, not 40 Days for Life, but when we all link arms and say, how can we change the world? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janine. I would give you